Is the ACC really about to keep the band together till 2030? Let's talk about the details.
You are Locked On ACC, your daily podcast on the Atlantic Coast Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Shout out to the everydayers, and thank you so much for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We figure with all the conference realignment news out there, the Pac-12 is kind of getting back together, and this ACC settlement was first reported last week. Kenton Gibbs and I wanted to break down the details. Kenton and I will also be talking later on about the ACC Players of the Week from Week 4, including the guy that they might as well name the Rookie of the Week trophy after once this season is over. But before we get to all that, we have the privilege of being joined here for the second time. He did so great last time, we had to bring him back. Doug Rohan, a.k.a. Rohan Law, who's been following all of the ACC court dramas very, very closely. And unlike Kenton and I, he is actually a lawyer. So we appreciate when Doug can hop in with us. So first of all, Mr. Rohan, we hear all this chatter about possible a shortening of the grant of rights to 2030, but yet another revenue model possibly being introduced that could distribute more revenue to big brands like Florida State and Clemson. Give us the details on this, Doug. And also, are any of the details maybe being misreported? Because the game of telephone can be ugly.
Well, Alex and Kenton, thank you so much for having me back. We did have a great time last time, and I've appreciated the opportunity to share with your listeners and viewers some of the details of the litigation. So yes, as you pointed out, Ross Dellinger reported last week that there was a preliminary offer on the table. There's some discussion as to whether or not it was proposed by Florida State and Clemson, or this was the ACC bringing it back up. We don't really know, and it doesn't really matter. That's really been the only bone of contention, is people are trying to read behind this. Who is displaying weakness? Who is representing a stronger position? It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, a settlement has to be agreed upon by both parties. So let's chill with the trying to figure out who's proposing what and trying to figure out what this means. What it means is that one possible solution, which we did bring up on another podcast about 2 months ago, is that Florida State and Clemson stay. This has always and only been about money. Now, this was a proposal that was brought up at the ACC Media Days 2 years ago. So in 2022, Florida State, before going scorched earth, said, look, we're not completely unhappy with the ACC. We didn't have the snub at that time. We're just worried about this money gap. And so if you can figure out a way to close the money gap, then we can figure out a way to stay happy and healthy here in the ACC. So the proposal, allegedly, was for Clemson and Florida State to get more money out of the other conference members. Now, the problem there is that means all the other conference members have to agree to cut their part of the pie into a smaller piece. Now, that was a non-starter. And agreed, that is something that was probably unlikely to ever be the solution to this case. So now we fast forward 2 years, 13 months into this litigation. ESPN is being dragged into this. ESPN has a deadline in February 2025 to decide what they want to do with the ACC conference. ESPN is seeing the turmoil of the conference realignment process. And so now we have a new factor that's being added, and that is the possibility of not cutting from the other ACC members, but ESPN doing what apparently is something that we didn't expect them to do, which is be willing to pony up a little bit more money. Now, there are a lot of questions. First off, this is a report from anonymous sources. Is it accurate or not? Who knows? We have no idea. Second, if this is the framework of a proposal, that framework as reported is ESPN puts in more money, that more money goes to those who have better viewership as opposed to performance enhancements or rewards for their performance in the playoffs. And then that also is paired with a reduction of the grant of rights from 2036 to 2030. So that is the framework of the agreement. Without knowing how much money is going to be put into this pot, it really is incredibly speculative to talk about whether or not this is good or bad. What I will say is that what FSU is looking at is $20 million next year versus Vanderbilt getting $50 million next year. So we have a $30 million gap already. And that amount is only going to expand as we go further down the line of the grant of rights. So just getting it reduced to 2030 is a big deal. FSU fans wanted to be out of the ACC now. FSU fans are ready to be done. But to wrap this up and land this plane, we can't get out of the ACC before 2025. Even if we announce today, we're after the August deadline, we play 2024, we play 2025. Chances are, if litigation continues, we go into 2026. So if you're telling me for some amount of money, we don't know how much, but we just have to stay happy from 2026 through 2027, 2028, 2029, 2030, we're only talking about 4 additional years, and then we know we're out, or at least we know we can get out. That overall is the basic framework for something that is agreeable to both sides. We'll see what the details actually are.
The details of that are important. And like you said, it is majorly speculative at the moment. So let's talk about what we do know. Let's talk about what has happened, what is on ink and all that. One of the things that is most perplexing to fans and myself and many folks here, Florida State did in fact sign and agree to the grant of rights twice before the litigation comes up. So what role do those signatures play in all this, or what has made them null and void now to where there is a substantive case that, judges are willing to hear?
That's a very fair question, Ken, and that's something that came up at the onset of this litigation. That's one of the few valid criticisms that come to this argument in this litigation. The problem with it is, first off, the leadership has changed. We had very weak leadership prior to Michael Alford, to President McCullough, to Mike Norvell, and to Stephen Ponder. Those are the 4 people now in charge of the upper echelon of Florida State. They are all very keen on saying Florida State returned to dominance, despite Mike Norvell's coaching choices in the last few weeks. So with that being said,
they got to win.
W, baby. So with that being said, they know the current status can't be sustained. And if FSU doesn't fight, or if FSU fights and loses, there's no difference. There's no change. So there is contract dispute law. There is an entire industry dedicated to, yes, I signed a piece of paper, but no, I don't think the other party is held up there under the bargain. So a contract is a two-way street. Florida State has an obligation. The ACC has an obligation. And what Florida State is trying to outline now under the new leadership, and that's why this is coming 7 years later, is the ACC has not met its obligations under the contract as well.
We're getting a tremendous explanation here, Doug Rohan of Rohan Law. Let's talk a little bit more about what this would do from a Florida State perspective and a Clemson perspective when we come back. You guys want to keep it locked right here? We're nowhere near done yet. We're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On ACC. Guys, I'm only getting started with 5-Hour Energy. I have a lot of late nights and early mornings during football season. 5-Hour Energy fixes tired fast, whether you have a long list to do for work or just a list of DIY projects to tackle at home. I've been doing a little bit of both of those lately. Take a 5-Hour Energy shot so you can check everything off your list. If you're like me, you always have a large list of projects. When you get your supplies for that project, do not forget the most essential supply, which is a 5-Hour Energy. With 0 sugar and a convenient portable size, it's the perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. The 5-Hour Energy website has flavors galore, like watermelon, tropical burst, grape, berry, and more. There's a flavor for everyone. Try them all. On the site, you even have the option to build your own 12-pack or 24-pack. You choose the flavors, and it's delivered right to your door. Go to 5hourenergy.com. That's the number 5hourenergy.com. Get some 5-Hour Energy product today. You can use our promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. This offer only valid till September 30th on one order, cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. Thank you so much for making this episode of Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcast. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're talking about this reported proposed settlement that could keep Florida State and Clemson in the ACC until 2030. Another part of this, Doug, and again, I know, like you mentioned, Florida State fans, Clemson fans, like they all definitely wanted to get out sooner than 2030. There's no question about that, but it looks like getting out sooner than 2030 would have, costed hundreds of millions of dollars in exit fees, right? I think it would be a matter of how high, but probably not anything less than about 140 million. So, I mean, wouldn't this solution where, you would have to wait an extra 4 or so years to make that extra revenue of a possible landing spot in the Power 2, but then you also wouldn't have to pay an exit fee in 2030 to get out. So the math may work out in your favor in the long run.
That's all negotiable. And again, also subject to details. Couple of the things that I would be interested in if I was in the room sitting there talking, okay, the Big 12 departures actually took place 2 years before the end of that grant of rights. We can't leave early because we've got a risk of having to pay through 2036. But if you reduce it to 2030, are we allowed to begin our negotiations in 2028, 2029? At the very least, we can start those negotiations without the risk of tortious interference because we know it ends in 2030. So in either of those two scenarios, this is what the benefit adds. Now, you mentioned a huge point to this. We've been stockpiling $200 million cash to try to get out of this conference. You're now telling me that if we just put in sweat equity of 2 more years, we get to keep that cash in our pocket in this era of NIL and potentially house suit litigation, and that's going to be a huge advantage to the program. So yes, I think that this is something that should be considered seriously. Again, the big question marks I have is ESPN really putting in extra money? Is that extra money really going to come to a difference of $10 to $20 million? Because that really needs to be the threshold of the difference. And where does that leave us with 2028, 2029, 2030 exits? Are we negotiating no exit fee? Are we negotiating a reduction of the exit fee? We still disagree that 140 million is a reasonable exit fee. Do we leave open the possibility of still litigating that down the road? All of those moving pieces can be included in whatever their negotiations end up being.
So we get that there is a lot of, hey, there's going to be some back and forth. There's going to be some negotiation. There's going to be all of these things. And we get that you don't know exact numbers. We don't know exact numbers. But if we were to say that this iteration of a settlement is reached, right? Not a settlement down the line. The current talks that are happening, if you were to put a percentage chance to say, hey, I believe it's 40%, 80%, 100% is happening tomorrow, what would you say in terms of how likely these current talks are to be substantive and make something shake in terms of, kind of ending all of these court cases?
We're coming up on 5 days now since Ross Dellinger's article was put out. Nobody has refuted the report. That is a very important data point, and that's what makes it very likely that this is the basic framework for a solution. Now, a settlement, by definition, nobody gets what they wanted. Neither party is happy. It's just they're less sad than they would be as if they lost. So if you tell me that this is the basic framework and Florida State gets $7 million, I think there's going to be some pissed off fans. If you tell me this is the agreement and the FSU gets $15 million, I think that's a lot more palatable. But again, it depends on how quickly then we can get out of the grant of rights contract, because it's that new contract, that new partnership that's going to offset what the costs and losses are.
I've heard some people, not me and Kenton, but like raise objections to the idea that you would implement a revenue model that would reward, television ratings. And I would say, like, why not? This is television money. Like, what I know people they're wired to think, college football conferences, traditionally, everyone gets an even split. I mean, you brought up the Vanderbilt example earlier. Like Vanderbilt making the same TV split as Georgia. Maybe that's just the way they've always done it, but it doesn't really make sense to me. I personally have no problem with rewarding television ratings with extra money.
Well, let me start off by saying I failed to give Kenton his percentage on the last question. He wanted to tie me down. But so with nobody refuting this, I'd say we're at a 70 to 80% likelihood of this deal being done for something similar. I've always said since my first podcast and first learning about the ESPN deadline of February 1st, I've always said this will be wrapped up before January 31st of 2025. That's where I've gone out on the limb. What the details are remains to be seen. But to your point, absolutely, it makes business sense to reward those who are bringing the advertising dollars. There's some projections that the top 4 ACC members are responsible for 60% of the viewership, and even those that are below the Miamis, the North Carolinas, the Clemsons, and Florida State, all of their viewership numbers are when they play one of those top 4. If you look at the recent viewership graphic that was put up that showed Cal, SMU, and Stanford, their editions, they have yet to have a game over 1 million viewers.
Oh, wow.
And that's now starting this year's conference play. So if you don't have those top 3 members, top 2 members in the conference, nobody's watching any of the games. So yes, a disparate distribution of those resources is appropriate. But again, the difference here is ESPN adding more money to the pot. Once you agreed on equal revenue sharing for all members, yeah, it's impossible for them to say, sure, let's go ahead and take less. Take 5% of my pie to give to somebody else. That's a hard sell.
That's really well said, and we appreciate your time. Doug Rohan, if you want to check him out on X, his X account is very informative, by the way, at Rohan Law PC. Anytime there's a new development, Florida State versus the ACC, Clemson versus the ACC, Doug is always a really good follow. Thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you for the info.
It's my pleasure, guys. You enjoy the rest of your night. Take care.
Always great
Awesome
chatting with you.
Stuff there, and we will continue, my friends. We're not done yet because the ACC weekly awards are out, and I think they might have to rename ACC Rookie of the Week to the Eli Holstein Rookie of the Week award because he is cleaning up. We'll talk about the others as well. You want to keep it locked right here. We're not done yet on this brand new episode of Locked On ACC. We all know FanDuel is America's #1 sports book. We've been having such a great time. The upsets, the action we've been getting on FanDuel all season long. And hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets at FanDuel. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Huge shout out to Doug Rohan for joining us, and thank you guys so much for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcast. For your next listen, make sure you check out our other shows. Kenton and Grayson do an awesome job on Locked On Wolfpack covering NC State. I host Locked On Canes covering Miami. All right, so Kenton, let's take a look at the players of the week from the ACC. Now, we could probably talk all day about Cam Ward, who wins ACC Quarterback of the Week, 404 passing yards, 3 touchdowns against USF in a dominant victory for Miami, 50-15. He became the first quarterback to throw for more than 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, the first ACC quarterback to do that, over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns in the first 4 starts of his career in the past 25 years. I think your guy, Phillip Rivers, might have been the last one, or I might be off on that, but it's been a long, long time since someone has started their career with a new team the way Cam Ward is doing at Miami. You're muted.
Well, this is a function of similarly to how we see a lot of records being broken, where it's like, well, you're kind of playing 16 games now. This is a similar function in like, yeah, he's starting his career in the ACC, but is he starting his career? It is very different than how Trevor Lawrence started, different than how Sam Hartman started, different than how, a little different. But what is not different, or actually what is, you muted me. Yep. Are we good? Okay.
I was trying to mute myself so I could cough, and I muted you by accident.
I'm trying to give him props, and the big Miami lobby is trying to shut me down. I was saying what is different is Cam Ward. We haven't seen anything like him. He is absolutely setting the world on fire right now, and I'm excited to see how this goes in ACC play. He has looked so phenomenal. I don't expect to drop off, and I mean that. I genuinely mean that. Anybody who knows me knows I don't like quarterbacks. I don't like giving them their credit. I don't like giving them their shine. I hate to see a quarterback getting some love, but I'll tell you what, if you can watch Cam Ward play ball and say he is not deserving of that love, you're not just a hater. You don't know ball, okay? Because that young man has been phenomenal.
On this, we can agree. And I think we can also agree on the other quarterback who's been getting a ton of love this season. It's a clean sweep, Kenton. 4 weeks into the year, all 4 weeks, Eli Holstein from Pitt has won Rookie of the Week. And he also doubled up last week, won straight up Quarterback of the Week as well. So he accounted for 5 touchdowns. Now, that was a dominant win against Youngstown State, not the toughest of opponents, but they put up 73 points, Pitt. It was crazy. 5 touchdowns, 3 passing touchdowns, 2 rushing touchdowns, 340 yards of total offense for Holstein, completed 67% of his passes in the game. Again, like we talked about him a lot after their win against West Virginia in the backyard brawl. You would never know this young man is a redshirt freshman. Like he looks like he's been out there slinging it for years.
Just as we all expected, Eli Holstein leading the undefeated Pitt Panthers and winning awards along the way. We all saw this coming. Anybody who didn't see it coming is a liar. Because what a story. What a story this Pitt team has been so far. Yeah. What a story. And I'll tell you, this is a team I'm a little bit more leery of in terms of conference play. But still, what Eli Holstein has done so far this year has been nothing short of magnificent. It has been nothing short of a young man going out there and putting it all on the line every week. And damn it, after all those comebacks, he deserves to cruise to one. He deserves to cruise on the end with an easy one, because every other time he's having all right, come on, boys. I'm rallying the troops. We're going to get this thing done. So much love to Pitt. Much love to Holstein. What a time.
So the other award winners from this week, running back Brashard Smith from SMU, 190 all-purpose yards. And, the Mustangs put it on TCU. That was a great game. They put up 66 points in that game. The receiver of the week, well-deserved, Lewis Bond from Boston College, scored the game-winning touchdown on a 42-yard catch and run. Like that was a huge play for Boston College to come from behind against Michigan State. And BC and Pitt, and Pitt's undefeated. Like I feel like BC and Pitt both have cases to be ranked right now, and they're not.
Absolutely. Both teams have a very strong case, and I'll say this. I know that this team doesn't deserve to be ranked, isn't anywhere near ranked. But SMU laid it on them boys thick. They made it clear, hey, we don't like y'all, and you know what? Since you want to run away from us, take this 66 with you. Take it on with you. Go on back to Fort Worth with this 66 on your head. But now, the two that you mentioned from BC and whatnot, they are, hey, this is a week where there were lots of special performances, because the receiver from Louisville was another contender for wide receiver of the week that I looked at. And I'm like, he made some plays. He made some, not just the 55-yarder, but he also made some other plays that you look up and say, man, that was important. But nobody's play was more important than Bonds. At the end of that game, when they need one, that was not an easy catch to slow down your momentum and make a catch where your window is closing, safety's closing in on you. In that moment, in that particular moment, man, that's the stuff of legend. He may not have to buy another drink on Chestnut Hill.
Now, another player who provided a clutch moment, may not have to buy drinks in Palo Alto anytime soon, was the Stanford kicker who won Specialist of the Week, Emmett Kenny, who hit it wasn't the longest kick in the world, but clutch. 39-yard walk-off kick to pull off the upset on the road, hostile environment at Syracuse. That was great for Stanford and great for Kenny to win. Now, I felt like maybe they should have given some kind of an award to Alec Iomanor for catching that 4th down. He didn't show up this week, but the kicker does.
I really and truly look at this and I say, are we done with the college kicker curse? Are we done with only talking about college kickers because they're going to find a way to miss it? I'll tell you what. That game, very good game, very entertaining. and to see that it came down to a last-second walk-off, and to see this young man be Captain Cool in that moment where you're underdogs.
I think they iced him before he made the kick too, and
you're underdogs on the road, iced, and you hit that kick. Let me tell you something. Hey, you're playing some good ball there. That's a moment that you love to see.
Yeah, and then also like when he was actually lining up for the kick, like I'll admit I wanted to see Stanford win for two reasons. Number one, I want to hear you taunt Jackson Holzer on the next episode of The Squad. But number two, like it's just upsets. Upsets are a good story. Yeah, and
always.
And I was because like Fran Brown iced him the first time, and then I think Fran had another timeout. And so when he was lining up the second time for the kick, I thought, is he going to ice him again? And like, well, what does that do to the kicker's psyche? Because they may call a timeout right when I'm running up to kick the ball, but no timeout the second time. He made it. That was great. Other ACC players of the week this week. This is notable. Patrick Payton from Florida State wins Defensive Lineman of the Week. And he certainly woke up, and it feels like Florida State's defensive line, who I know they lost to Memphis the previous week, but the D-line actually played pretty well. They played really well this past week against Cal, and Pat Payton had a career-high 3 sacks in the game, 3.5 tackles for loss in the game. So, Florida State gets their first win. Pat Payton was very deserving to get ACC Defensive Lineman of the Week.
Rest in peace to Club Godzilla, also known as Beat King, but he used to start off a lot of his songs with, "Why did y'all wake me up?" Then I feel like that's what the rest of the ACC is going to be saying in terms of tackles, watching Patrick Payton, because he's showing. He's turning into that guy that we all knew he had the potential to be at the beginning of this season. He's turning into the guy that we all expected him to be, this game plan record supreme, this guy that, if you want to get in the third and long against him, you don't need a game to get him free. You don't need to call a dog to get him free. You just say, hey, there's a tackle, there's a quarterback. Figure it out. And by golly, he's going to figure it out more often than not. He was supposed to be the catalyst and the leader of that Florida State defense, especially the defensive line. He's turning into that. He's getting the credit for it, because without him, I don't believe Florida State wins that game.
Yeah. The other ones didn't mention linebacker of the week, David Bailey from Stanford. So 2 Stanford players get the nod this week. And offensive line was Noah Josie from Virginia, their starting left guard. He helped pave the way for Virginia's 384 rushing yards against Coastal Carolina in that victory. So I guess like the only couple things surprised me. And I know like you've got 17 teams to give out like 8 Players of the Week award, but I'm a little surprised nobody from Louisville and also nobody from Clemson made the cut. So I guess try harder next week, right?
I have told people for quite some time, and folks say that I'm detracting from the winners or hating on the winners. What NC State has put out so far this year has been so bad. They've struggled to beat Cass Tech. That's a wonderful high school from the Midwest and the best city in America. It's the best high school in America. Don't ask me any questions about it. But in all seriousness, it is a little shocking to not see Clemson guys get in, but you also have to consider they all got pulled so early. It was tough for them to rack up the stats. You know what I mean? Their defensive end, Tamarian, I want to say number 3, he was so good when he was in the game. He just wasn't in the game long. I mean, he was whooping Big Anthony Belton like he stole something. He turned Cadillac into a Buick real quick. So, it's a situation where, hey, Clemson's guys, they balled out. If they really got aggressive and said, we're gonna put 100 on these boys. The score was 28-0 by the end of the first quarter.
Yeah, that was rough. I was watching that game, and that's when at some point I texted you just to do a wellness check.
Hey, listen. I love the Pac. I love ACC football, but at the end of the day, my check ain't going to get no bigger if they're successful. You know what I mean? I love them. I'm not that guy that's like a fantasy football freaking out, because while these things are important, there's more to life than this. And I get it. I know it sounds crazy for me to say this. Like, it's easy to say that when you get whooped on by 50 points. But, there will always be more to life. And I want y'all to remember that, listeners of Locked On ACC. You know what I mean? Hey, if you get into a fight at the game, you can't listen to us and the squad, because Jackson, I'm coming for you, brother. I'm coming. I hope you know. I hope you're prepared, Mr. Holzer. But in all seriousness, it was a great weekend, and those teams and those guys did play great. Clemson had a lot of guys that played great. So did Louisville. Again, I talked about their receiver and how I would have given him maybe a second look for wide receiver of the week. But at the end of the day, I seriously say in some of these situations, it just shakes out that you were great this week. Somebody was just a smidge greater.
I mean, what I want to see is like, is there any freshman in the ACC who can upstage Eli Holstein just one time, right? Just got 8 more weeks to go, right? Probably more than that with bye weeks. We have like 10 more weeks of football to go in the regular season. Can somebody, some freshman, redshirt freshman, true freshman, just outflash Eli Holstein once? Because the dude is running away with this thing so far. We appreciate everyone's time so much. He is Kenton Gibbs from Locked On Wolfpack. I am Alex Dono from Locked On Canes. Big thank you to Doug Rohan Law, for joining us and explaining this proposed settlement from top to bottom. We will talk to you guys again next time on another episode of Locked On ACC. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.